People that tell you maybe that you're beautiful, the gorgeous, and maybe the things that I can find that.
People that tell you maybe that you're beautiful, the gorgeous, and maybe the things that I can find that for them. Finding acceptance but also the grief, for the do you look at you when you're something else, for that to be the path, for the pathological, for the this, to be the psychological behavior that you cannot refuse. Regardless of the how, the enough, for the end, of the job, hope is best for you, for the memories, and you can find a glowing of a scream, but you can never scream at me, for the never to hold in life, and accountability for the what you can find account. Absolutely no emotions will find you, for the only the person for the you can find a strong enough for yourself. Unfortunately, your dumb ass and I've been for the only the mind, for nothing going to miss you. I love you. And still hold those special moments dearly to my heart. I doubt if she even thinks of me at all. We're apart. And now we're apart. We were once a part of each other's life, living inside that apartment and couldn't be apart. Look at us now. That part. People that tell you maybe that you're beautiful, the gorgeous, and maybe the things that I can find that for them. Finding acceptance but also the grief, for the do you look at you.
How did I become single? And you're out to make haste and mingle. For the common traits of that, for to be a jingle. It was a bittersweet goodbye for the kick me down the wounds. Send me that for the place where I could never stay tuned. For this would be the Looney Tune. For the goodbye. For this would be the poem. And this would be the confirmation for the matter. For what you say for the love of us. And you can't fix that. For the inevitable. For the you don't want it to change. And the hope of the grief and the hope. And this to find that. For the to the hearts and have no choice but to give up. But to find acceptance as means of salvation. At some point you had to choose your life over that narcissist or the manipulations and something to keep you defined to begin to understand for this to be the life and this experience. And that pain is faded. Fading into something far less than threatening, enough for the wild, for the truly for the nerves, and just the truth for the go, for the giver, the only the mind, what it needed for this to be the pain, for the enough for the what that can make me feel, the attachment that I can find a pile of mush. In a dusty envelope for the baggage that I can find a remembrance of you in a relationship that sank. Bittersweet, I hate that word. Makes me sad enough and so absurd for when it's time to sink or swim, for always drown for the missing you. Goodbyes are this bittersweet, for the good was a relative word, for the this it wasn't meant to be, for the beckon for the you to come to me, for the sun began to rise and so fled, and not for the beat no more lies and vanished, and not for the right before my eyes in the silence, for now my fear begins to dry to call for the endless of ring, and you can put me on the block for the for the anger, for the fact, for the listen outside the door, for the window, for the falling apart, for the silence of wind, for the you gonna go out and meet his friends, and upon the love for the woman, the gentle the heels and find it. That was soon then, it was hard to find that, for this to be the hate, and never tell the truth, and this to be the making mess of a little girl, for the clinging too tight for the pearls. Letting go for the heart, for the won't beat, for the missing you, for the never sleeping, for the never coming to however the show. Silence and solitude, for this to be the doorstep, for the making the difference in only silence. Return to me, because I meant nothing to you. So many times for the this to be the hearts and not be troubled, for this to be the eye, for remember, for the reminder, for this to be the reason enough for you, for the end that suffer, for the happiness and I've been patiently waiting for. Will I ever have it in store? She stole something special for me that I adore. And it belonging to a sense of a family and security for the something that I can believe in, for the scrap of the word, for that I can call a family a home, for the marriage and unity with the Trinity, but it's something I can make a vow to God with, and this is be the coming back home with such a wonderful peace and not the feeling for the whatever it was. Spoke to the proud, for the proud it was, and this would be the happiness, to be the family for the process, for the reconciled, enough for the only the heartfelt, for the good, the emotion, for the be heartbroken and shattered, for the crushed the way I am now, be possible. Describe myself for one obstacle. A pathological for you can find for what to make a difference for the adorning, for the zooming out for the forgiving, for the figured out for what you wanted for the most, and that for to be the mirror back to me for the never, and to see what I didn't want to find that was real. The ghost, the figmentation of it, I can doctor feel for this, the questions enough for the over the issue, for the emotion over there, for the vampire, for the leeching out to me, for the grateful sucking, everything for the all of my energy, for the raving, and the not for the lunatic, for the just to be the victim, for the non-mistaken. You can say that peace and save you goodbye. If you don't want to do it, and live it for the action. A verb and diligence for the always successful enough to hang yourself there like a hangman over the missing the words and the vows, and I can find the silent letter. Not for the going in detail, for the horrendous enough, for the entire mind, and find it delirious enough, the understanding for the impression with what you hated, and I can find it repulsing for why you called it out and demonstrated a demon. That for the barely for the human at all, for the carry on, for the over the find the forefront, for the happy enough, for the you deserve it all, for the involving of what you can find it briefly approach it. This would be the divorce and never called it, never know I can mind to find it, put a fork in it, for the spirit never I can kind of have it, stated for the devastated, for the enough, for the you never find it, hoping for the individualism, for the never to see real enough, for the narcissistic, find simplistic enough, for the simple.
I loved when you were kind. I loved when you could be come to realize that you knew who you were. For maybe I knew. Maybe I did. Maybe I wish I could mean a little bit more to you, but as it does to you, for the wish I can understand why. I wish that if it made sense enough, I wish I can shut it off. I wish I could get this fit off of my shoulders to keep on dancing and have I mastered that grace and though I keep trying. Matter that for the meaning, how many months would I find it, ignore for the innocent, for the how many texts and emails and how the heartfelt apology for the never to find the reason for the declaration to love. Some nights are off for the words get into true, and you can find that for the hurts me. It stays up all night for the yearning for the it hurts me so bad that I had the family for the falling back into the promises and the cosmic and epiphany for the tearful, the apologetic for the remorse and times and never to die for the time for the embarrassing the shameful your time again for the point for the green to marry you for the dips that knew it all would end in heartbreak. So how badly I wanted to trust you, but I never wanted to believe in you for the question, not for my sanity, for the desperation to be loved and not to be known, for the pardon, for the proof, that for the none, the divine, the dark evil, the person, the worthless, and the piece of I can find that this a piece of doodle for the only the one to believe in you for the this that I am. You told me for years, along with anyone who still believes in you, I do. My head was spun so many sideways from the living in the fear for your next rage and sudden disappearance. You can find that lighting both the switches are devoted for the intense and the vindictive for the disgust and this to be the seemingly no reason for the yet. It told it was something for the kind of behavior initiated for the this to be the constantly walking on eggshell for you can never snap off for the time bomb. Developing for the painful sense of the bacteria infection for the sickness and I would give for the worst of it to the only defined non-existent for the energy for the leftover for the only deplete. During the times that I was most vulnerable for you coming in before the kill and disappearing that for the way you can find who where was that woman I married. Who kicks me when I'm down for the still despicable for this to be the love I felt for the camp and shut it off for the cruelty. How do I love her still easy enough for the time again for the part of the time to feel the deeply sit out enough that I could be that one for the throwing it tantrum, being mad and upset. Nothing anyone to do for the helping me, and I can hold that for the hold you close anymore for they don't want to play your games any longer for the I believe that you're a tearful story enough for the remorse and the self-reflection with the have the change. The gray hairs in my head disappeared and begins with me facing reality for the accepting responsibility for the admitting the truth and I can know I can let you go. I deserve better. My heart been broken 10,000 times and think you're strong enough you can handle it for the this is not for the denial for this to be the exhaustive for the informative. This is not to call you out but to call you in for the letting the settle the devils the stamina for the never the resolving the ends for the conflict for the apologetic in the most authentic way. But would you ever matter that for the how it appears to be for the others and you can have that for the one with the senior son for the help in the mirror. But the sudden for the derm and that for the fight for the events that you could think you're reporting for the never about you for the never to think about the person of the victim for the your expectation for the only to manage down dismissive at the time for the cruel to you. You can find that initial stage and you can find no effort for the beyond that for the you go find somebody different and leave me hanging for the forsaking me for the value. Diminish to the point for the nothingness inside of your eyes and the fact for the mere stranger for the enough for the hold the way for the you can never even have my children call me. Dump that for the shame for the rage in you. That for the simple conversation for the never beyond for the they have to find the endeavor for what you could find for walking on. Silent treatment and experience and the cognitive dissonance for the discombobulation for the light and gaslighting for your thoughts to find and tell yourself a dissipated normal and adult conversation for the interaction to never to resolve on the cycle for being punished and forgiving, forgetting again. Isolate yourself for the friends for this to be the support and blaming and depending upon. You find those judgmental things and this would be the closest way you find it nice and over the faces. Weakness and trauma for your intimate for the secrets against you. The secrets that you don't want to tell for the reappearance and this would be the acting if nothing unusual happened ever at all. And accountable for the fly into that rage, and you can find the answer directly. Question for the never concerning for you don't want to never find the shelf so unstuck for the mistake for mistake, for the unable to leave that for you can finally leave the question for the project that for the only the good intentions and never the lunatic. Yourself if you never to believe that you are as bad as you are for this to be the more of the equivalence of the sign of expressing your frustration for the intense of the abuse that you give. That for the questioning, that for the resulting the trauma, that for the interpersonal violence of the beginning, feeling crazy over the time for the beginning, for the number, I can feel the pain. Other from women in our life and the call of attention, but enough of them never remain but unscarred. In fact, for that regards to that throughout the entire relationship for the negativity of the cruelty, you can find it for the speaking of that the former, for the you can have the done it again for the strength, psychological for the taking the time for the years to understand your what you could recover from for you were conscious of it for the bishop to change. It's not that for the innocence, and that for the mind, for the being, for the rage, and you are that for the accusing me of lack of integrity, where you come to be obtained for the narcissism supply, that for the omnipotent, omnipotent, that for the knowing that where you can have that effect on you, for the shrugging off, for the allegation, for the this would be the this is securing your life, for this would be the simply games for 2 reasons, and narcissistic ended back with
I loved when you were kind. I loved when you could come to realize that you knew who you were, for maybe I knew.
Our game is over. We can keep
Our game is over. Our game is over. We can keep fighting and cuddling and crying and smoking each other for the most intimate wounds that we share when we trust. Was the drug for our choice? Do we smoke for the have no trust, but the left to give you for the don't know for the how you broke that for the so badly for you weren't able to feel consistently happy with anyone, namely yourself, before the wolf child inside of you needs to tear them apart for the feast. And this would be the juicy vulnerabilities for they entrusted to you. Spread that interest around the time for the then blame them for the cardinal for the mess left behind for them. Yes, despite that blood dripping down your face to the charming master that remains perfectly in place in the lifetime for the practicing, no doubt. Sadly, I know that they're women with the designated or destined for the honor of ignore that are bloody for the warnings and to suffer that for the same fate. I know I certainly waved that wave of the woman for the we were kind enough for to warn me not to run, not walk away from you. And naively, I hope that enough effort for the honest communication one day things would change. But if it was good enough for the supporters, enough for the cut the ties with the friends, and you despise it, I for the one for the being the business partner for the 7 years, enough for it was created, enough for the pretty and finally successful. Sexy enough for the player for the acronym for the love harder. Phrase you for the no, over optimistically for the own depart for the personal brand for that you can find it emerging for the hiding place inside of your anger. In the love of the shine its light into the world for this is but it won't for there's those slogans. Overused philosophies that expound for the personal gain for the can't be further for the embodying for the light. You take such public pride in shining and merely avenue for the such a strength in your ego for the gain, for the power you chase. Once I mastered one of the qualities you told me so many times that I lacked that the rules of that for your game changed. There was suddenly something new. It was disappointing about you for the relationship forever off balance for the impossible to ever measure up for the finest stable on ground. Or did it do that for the feeling of being controlled for the luring someone in for the parading them around your image for divine them for the whole for the eventually spitting them out cruel punishment you convince yourself to deserve being weak enough to love you. And should any of these women ever have that for the self-esteem and enough for the month, the subtle enough for the abuse or just to have an opinion for the questions of the action, and enough for the energy to express themselves with their needs, and I did that for the long time, and enough for the hell to have no theory. It's easier to sit in silence and to take that unwanted for the rage in private, rather than publicly anger for the after the beast to the face of the such a cruelty for the pretty for the vengeful. Retaliation, it would not turn to for every belief for this to have the humanity for the kindness and the intimacy for the on its head. Smear yourself for the campaign for the base that for the most and sweetly intimate for the secrets you can find it entrusted in someone for the only the way off limits. Distorted for the virgin for the weaponized and down for the life about your friends and this family for the maximum discredit for the humiliation for the over that for the top of the character assassination. Screaming obscenities and this would be the room full of lies. Exaggerations told from that for be the closet. Herself and her against the guy for the her public for the shunning for the perfect for the over the torture for the eventually she will face them all. Once she suffered enough and she would come back to that so if nothing happened there for the nonsense. This would be the nonsensical for the this to be the message like I still love you but I care about I always did breaking after the fight for the never to relieve the punishment is over this sweeping under the rug until the next. How should she react to remain rightfully angry enough for the hurt? Maybe she'd attempt to discuss her feeling for the she would be called the crazy, the emotion of war, reactive for this would be the valid for the pain, minimizing and talked over that for the pointless and even try. Your cruelty to break for never dread to hurt enough for the room to scream to cry. So this is yell back for the face for out loud for the sheer for the frustration of the self-perversion. Preservation is suddenly find that for the will we be discussing. Behavior over the never yours and taking the point you were never to repeat it up again for the future fights. And even that for the reaction to being twisted, exaggerated to the point that you now claim the victim. Status and that for the end up with apologizing to you. I was sorry enough for just the beginning for the just to be the regular basis and I'm over them having much of the just to the humble to myself and eventually to stop it fighting for the way that I wasn't able to be with find relief in the bare staff for the admitting that only one of efforts would be caught up with the hell what did I do alone. You're for the relationship that you're a narcissist if you can find it entirely similar to yours. Pathological, the games you play, entirely predictable. You find the way to search for your behavior for this slowly one day. If you can find it, recognizing yourself for the epitome for the domestic violence for the maybe the pain, the suffering for the mental for the slowly dehumanizing for the purpose of the finding yourself. Install a mental filter inside of your head for the managing the expectations down a little bit for the time for the before you do for everything you say, for the things to go to filter for that you can find if it eventually condition. Most of it expressing your needs for only leads to pain. Recovering from your abuse, and this would be the hideous, linear at times and feel nothing, ending for the narrative, heading for the such a long time coming. Our game is over. We can keep fighting and cuddling and crying and smoking each other for the most intimate wound.